Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to all our attendees today. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Effective Instrumentation Strategies for Data-Driven Product Management. I am Tanuj. I'm one of the volunteers at Product Camp Hyderabad, and I will be your host for today's webinar. For those of us who are attending a Product Camp Salon for the first time, please allow me to provide you a quick overview of Product Camp. Product Camp Hyderabad is one of the 25 blocks in the chain of product camps that are organized globally to develop and grow localized product communities. Every year, we conduct an annual event that brings together product professionals in Hyderabad and other cities with the aims to form and propagate a culture of learning, sharing, and growing collaboratively while making a positive impact. In addition to the annual event, we hold monthly PCH salons, sometimes as small offline events and sometimes as webinars, to continue the spirit of learning, sharing, growing, and impacting as a group. For today's webinar, we have been joined by an experienced product practitioner, Pawan Kumar Adda, who is currently working with Salesforce as a senior product manager. Thank you for joining us for today's session, Pawan. Without further ado, over to you.
Yeah, hello everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, good evening, based on wherever you are. I am Pawan Kumar, as Tanuj introduced me. I am working as Senior Product Manager for Salesforce. I have been in Salesforce for almost 2 years and have been in product management for more than 8 years, I would say. My experience has been solely and predominantly on the SaaS business. So that's the reason I have a lot of experience around how to make sure that the SaaS business actually works for businesses and customers and what are the revenue drivers for SaaS. So today we will be covering the general product instrumentation strategies and what is important, but we basically broke it down into these sections. So first we'll actually start with what exactly is product management and what are the users. Then we'll move to the typical progression of a data-driven company or team that'll actually pretty much help you draw the lines between why we actually have to do a product instrumentation. Then we'll actually jump into the sustainable product instrumentation framework, which will actually help you with the tool set to apply in your workspace whenever you have the opportunity to lead a product instrumentation project. And towards the end, we'll actually leave you with some references and best practices that will actually help you during this journey. So first thing, we can actually start with what exactly is product instrumentation. This is a definition that I actually found in one of the interesting books I was reading. I think it was Lean Analytics or something like that, where they're saying that a product instrumentation is a process of mapping your product with the aim to identify relevant data points. And the key here is relevant data points, which I'm going to talk a lot about in the coming slides. But what's interesting is instrumentation a novel concept? Is something new? Are we just doing it in this whole tech boom and when companies are trying to become more data driven, like Google and Uber and Facebook? I would say no. I mean, if you look at our past, let's say other sectors which have been leading in different decades, instrumentation has been a key concept when it comes to constantly improving their processes and seeing if they're, let's say, identifying defects and reducing errors and let's say churn and all that stuff. So wastage is what they call it in the Toyota world. So the things that actually stand out very clearly is in the manufacturing sector, where Six Sigma has been forever, where each and everything is tried to be let's say constantly instrumented and collected, and data is actually used to further improve their quality and reduce defects and wastage. Logistics sector is one other area that you would always see instrumentation taking leaps and bounds when it comes to baggage package delivery to, let's say, airport logistics handling and all that stuff. But what we are basically doing is taking these concepts and taking it even more into the tech world, where we have the ability to be more agile, and now we can actually instrument our product to get this information. So technically, if you look, what do we exactly map in products? So what we basically, when I say map, it's basically trying to say what do we exactly care in our products per se. And in our products, I'm more specifically talking about the tech products that I think most of us are actually owning or managing or whatever. So there are basically two things that you care about. One is the user actions and intents. And when I talk about user actions and intents, it's more around just trying to grab information about how the product is actually using, how the customers are actually using your product. And when I say product, it can be an app, it can be a web, it can be a mobile only API or something like that. And it could be like, so things that we care about are how are the touches and the clicks, how are the swipes and the drags happening, what are the form fills ratios and all that. So this will actually help you get more understanding about the product usage per se, like, are the customers actually using their features or products and all that stuff. The second thing that we will actually map is goals. So here, what we're talking about is when you actually, as a PM, when you actually start out with the journey of creating a product or a feature, you have some set goals in mind. And what we'll try to do here is also make sure that we have some signals in place to make sure that we are identifying a customer actually reached the goal that he intended to reach. So here we're thinking about, let's say, some high level goals that we might have, like about form submission, payment done, or message received, or something like that. The other thing that we'll also care about is the drop-offs. So anyone who is actually has been interacting with a growth product or has been a growth PM knows the importance of drop-offs. This is going to be a single metric that will actually decide if your lifetime customer value is high or low, and is your advertisement channel sustainable or not. So before we actually move on, let's do a quick interactive poll. So one of the questions that we would like to ask the cohort here is, which of the following techniques are you currently using or have been used in the past to drive product decisions?
The poll is now on. I request all the attendees to please cast their votes. We'll wait for some more time so that everybody can share their inputs. Thank you for sharing your inputs. We now have the results. So, interesting mix. We have got 36% people saying that they have been using feature usage analytics. This is the most voted section, and then 26% each for A/B testing and for customer journey analysis, and heat maps and session recordings at 10%. And everybody has used at least one of the four techniques. Great
That
mix.
Absolutely, Tanuja. This is great to actually see the distribution here. Definitely was expecting a bit different from what from the general industry practices when I gave this talk in the past. It is very good to see that the audience is a bit more mature in terms of using some of these products. So absolutely, I mean, the distribution, when we say that 36% is using it for future usage, this definitely is the low hanging fruit. Whenever we are thinking about data driven decisions or anything like those sims, like the first thing that comes in mind is to be able to measure the usage. And yeah, I mean, A/B tests and customer journey, as they suggest, are definitely used a lot to gauge, like make better product roadmap decisions, specifically, which product which feature to invest or which feature to go live. But one thing I want to also touch upon is the heat maps. I forgot the number that you told. I think it was the lowest of all, right? The heat maps
Yes,
session and recording.
10%.
Yeah,
10%.
absolutely. Absolutely, that actually makes sense. So one of the things I have seen in my journey or my experience is heat maps and session recordings are used, but are more used in, let's say, startups or maybe B2C kind of space, but are not very predominantly used in B2E. Because when you're talking about session recording, you're thinking of capturing the whole screen of a specific user and seeing like how the customer has used your product. It is basically doing user research at scale. Previously, you basically call focus group into your company and let them use the feature. What here we're doing is we're basically recording session for the whole user. So a lot of enterprise customers, especially, are not very comfortable sharing that sensitive screens, which has like sensitive information about their customers. So that's the reason you would see a lot of maybe the audience not having a lot of exposure into that. or maybe not using it. That's actually great. Awesome. So moving on. So I did not go really specifics in terms of what are the different things that you could do with having product instrumentation in place. But these are some of the meta things that you could basically do, and these are opportunities. And as you can see, the first one definitely is product analytics. Here we are talking about identifying how the product is being used by a specific user or a cohort of users. You're talking about are there any user flow gaps or frictions that we could actually fix. It gives you very detailed information about like if you have shipped like multiple features as A/B tests, you could actually see like which one is performing better than the other one, and what is your long-term roadmap to make sure that the one that is successful is now productized. The second thing that I found very interesting is driving user engagement. And when I say user engagement, I think a lot of people always talk about, hey, how the users actually using your product. But one thing they always miss is this information that we collect is key to actually also use to drive conversions back. Or like if there are customers who are not active for a very long time, you can actually use these signals to provide them some context, or let's say provide them some let's say some offers or some communication to drive them back. One example I can give is how many of you actually must have got like an email from some e-commerce company where you just happen to.
Pawan, we are experiencing a bit of a voice issue.
So what you're
We're
basically
not
doing.
hearing.
So are you able to hear us? Hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you now. Yes, yes, Pawan, we can hear you now. We lost you for about a minute. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to repeat the drive user engagement, or should I move to churn where I am right now?
I think it's worth repeating, Pawan.
Perfect. Okay. So sorry for the lag. I think it's internet problems here. So when I say drive user engagement, what you basically, the thing that I'm trying to emphasize here is a lot of us actually just think about the in-app engagement that we give to our customers. So it's about how do we measure like if the customer is actually using a specific feature, or what is the data that he's storing and all that stuff. But what we do not realize is the post product usage, or the outside product usage engagement that we could actually leverage with these signals. The example I was just giving just a few seconds ago was the e-commerce. So how many times you could have actually got an email from an e-commerce company or a product where they would say that, hey, you left this product in the cart and you have not gone through the checkout process or the buy process. Can you just come back and complete that? This is basically you driving the engagement. You're trying to pull the customer back into your product to achieve your product goals. I've also seen like using these signals to provide even more context, and let's say reduce the friction for our customers. So one of the things I've recently noticed is one of the e-commerce company that I was shopping with. I did not go ahead and buy it for some reason, and I think after a few days forward, I actually got an email from them saying that, hey, here's a special offer for you for like the Father's Day or something like that, and it is basically telling me to hey, go buy it. This is a limited time offer. So what you're basically doing is you're driving engagement, but that is not just in the product, but using the signals to actually drive engagement when the customers are also outside your product. The third thing that I was moving on to is churn prediction. And what I was basically telling here is this is a very nuanced space which is coming up new, and especially when the whole SaaS products are actually now booming, and you have like a lot more companies in this space. There's some startups actually do specific tools for churn prediction. And when we say churn prediction, it's a pretty interesting thing. What they basically do is they're using all the signals that you have been collecting about a user in your product, whether it's like their feature usage, whether it's their let's say engagement inside and outside the product, and they're able to create some cohort analysis to give you prediction if a specific account or a customer is actually on a verge to churn. So basically, you are saying that, hey, this is a revenue that you might actually lose in the next few months or year, like few days, maybe few months, based on whatever your criteria is. So this is very interesting. So because what it actually helps is there's this whole new group that we call as customer success. They use this information to to re-engage with the customer to find out like what is the problem that they're having, that they can make sure that these customers are no longer in the churn or red accounts, and they can start being an engaged user. So very important, because as we all know, it is much more expensive to get new users than constantly grow your current user and try to get recurring revenue from them. uh, it's SaaS 101. The fourth one is prioritization and validation. And this is very interesting for all the PMs in the group here right now. You could actually use this data to decide which product or which products or which features you want to invest a bit more, which one do you want to prioritize versus which one do you want to bump them down. Some of the growth PMs out here would also use this data to decide which flows need more tinkering, because right now you have like this conversion ratio that is not hitting the marks that you have with with your management or with your, let's say, stakeholders. So again, these are general, I would say, four big opportunity areas that I feel that having a good instrumentation strategy would actually help you and provide value in each of these sectors. Now, I talked a lot about, what is product instrumentation, and what the use is and all that stuff. But there's a fundamental question. Like I think a lot of you might be feeling already about it is, why would I actually care about this? Why should I even do it? And first of all, like, why now? What is so important? And this is a very interesting question, because when I was trying to do this talk, I was actually looking back at my experience and trying to figure out the actual need to do this. And my search for why actually stopped at this book called Winning the Data. I'm not sure if like how many people have read it, but it's pretty interesting book by this venture capitalist called as Thomas Togus. Very good VC who actually invests in some of the big SaaS companies, and he is one of the thought leaders in the SaaS space. And the why is actually hidden in the framework that he talked about in this book that I'm going to talk about. So So what he basically says is that a typical progression of a data-driven company is basically four phases. First phase, and you can all empathize and you relate to this, because I'm pretty sure each one of you might fall in one of these phases in your companies based on which company you work for or what is the maturity of your product. So phase one is ask your engineer friend. So every company, when they try to become like data driven, there's unstructured data. Like they don't have any strategy in place, and whenever they need some analysis to be done, what they do, they basically run to their engineering friend and ask them via some informal request, saying that, hey, can you just pull the data for me, please? I'd like to create this report that will help me make X decision or Y decision. Sometimes it's very easy, sometimes it's not very easy, because it all depends on the relationship that you have with these engineers who are trying to do this favor. Again, these favors are not part of the day-to-day work that they do, it's something beyond. So it all depends on the relationship that you have. A lot of challenges with this. First, there is no it's very prone to error and a lot of rework, because again, it's just an informal request that you ask, and the engineer might be just giving the data based on what he understood. You all know the game of Chinese whispers, right? How it works. A lot of things actually happen here. It also is very dependent on how proactive the engineer is able to pull that data. Sometimes it might take ages to pull that data because the engineer is very busy, and or maybe there's a lot of constant back and forth. And last thing that is very important that we all kind of like overlook is the lack of GDPR compliance. You're basically telling an engineer to basically look at customer data and then figure out like what analysis that you need. There are no stage gates, there are no anonymizations and all that stuff. Sometimes he might not even think about that. He might just pull all that data and give it to you, and now you are just holding this raw data which is not privacy compliant by your government, by your company's standards. A lot of companies struggle in first phase one, and then eventually they figure out, what, I need to have a better solution. Of course, let's go to phase two. Now, what you do is that you basically try to work with your engineer friends to use some of the existing tools that you have to be your data source. And the quote unquote is sometimes always like, Salesforce is actually known for it. Like we always see like number of objects that they keep on increasing. And when we talk to our customers, we see that sometimes they're using it for just storing data because it's very easy in say, lot of challenge with this. There's limitation of scale. Sometimes these products are not made for these, but we kind of use them. So again, there's no standardization. There's scalability issues, and sometimes it just causes a lot more frustration. And again, we have the same problem. It might just not be GDPR compliant because you're just trying to pull all the data and pushing into a third-party data source. The third thing, now you get frustrated with data phase two because you have these like cost going up of using a specific product for these non-transactional data, and now you're basically thinking, you know what, there has to be a better solution. Of course, let me go to phase three, which is about access. Like you try to work out with the engineering team to create these jobs or create these data dumps which are going to pull all this data from your data source and push into some accessible data stores like S3, or maybe you're talking about some SQL server or maybe some MongoDB. So what you're basically telling is you don't have access to the data, but I'm going to transform the data and I'm going to load into a data source that you can have access to. Works most of the time only when you have a audience which is very technical savvy. Think about like sales guy having to go to this to S3 and trying to pull that reports. I don't know like how interested he would be. Think of non-functional product managers who are not very technical but still have to get this data to make some decisions. Again, does not work. Some challenges around there. Having all this, I mean, a lot of the data-driven companies who are like very proud of being data informed in their decisions are usually in the fourth phase, where they have already created a culture of and a data fabric in their system, where we're talking about having a shared understanding of the data model, shared understanding of the data warehouse. They already have strategies and policies in place to maintain the data dictionary, maintain like which features, what events, what data we are pulling from what, and they have a comprehensive strategy on making sure that they're constantly updating it. So what's key here is to know the point that the the phase four companies, the ones that are already data driven, actually have a universal data dictionary or taxonomy, and this is what we call as data instrumentation strategy, which is key here. Again, before I move on, something I would want to put out here is sometimes you use some third-party tools to be that warehouse. So a lot of the PMs here might already be aware with Looker, Mixpanel, and others, but there could also be some proprietary technology that you might be using for yourself. This brings us to the more interesting part of actually being able to create a sustainable product instrumentation framework. So we talked about what, we talked about why we need it. Now let's talk about how do we build it. So in my opinion, there's basically four stages to create a sustainable product instrumentation. Again, frameworks always works, very easy to remember. So I just thought maybe I'll just put it in that. Stage one is define. Stage two is align. Stage three is instrument, and phase four is refine. And we'll talk in depth with each of these stages. So let's start with define. Let's start with define. So when we say define, what's interesting is every initiative should actually have a North Star, something that you're trying to achieve. And define is nothing but like what is the business outcomes that you're trying to drive with this whole instrumentation exercise that you're going to do. It's a lot of investment, by the way. Like you're saying that I'm going to be in this multi-year journey to make sure that my product is constantly emitting the right metrics so that I can make data-driven decision. But it has to start with like what is the outcome they're trying to achieve. So for different companies, it can be different, by the way. Like again, it can be all the four for a lot of companies. It can be one of them. It can be maybe two or three of them. So one thing is like, are you trying to increase your ROI, the return of investments? So when I say return of investment, it's about, are you trying to increase your marketing spend or decrease your, let's say, optimization ratios, advertisements, and all that stuff? Are you trying to decrease churn to make sure that you have like a better catch on your LTV? Are you trying to increase the retention? Or LTVs again, sorry. And the last one is, are you trying to improve the conversion? Again, all of these are high level business outcomes. They'll all have like some subsequent lagging. These are all lagging indicators, by the way. There are some leading indicators that you could do. Leading indicators can be how a customer is actually using a specific feature, which will actually help you drive retention, all that stuff. I mean, we can talk about this based on the questions that the community has. So before I actually move on, I can take a maybe 30-second break and open up a poll here. Who, according to you, would lead or own the product instrumentation strategy in a company?
The poll is on now. Request all the attendees to please share your inputs. Uh, so while we are waiting, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A panel to raise them, and we'll answer them towards the end of the session. Great. So we have the votes. The distribution we have received is 69% of the attendees feel it should be owned and led by product management. Next comes data sciences, 19%. 7% of the people think it should be owned by product engineering, while only 3% people feel it should be led by UX design. No votes for marketing and sales.
Perfect. Thank you, Tanuj. So this is really great to see this distribution. So uh, I agree with the majority here. Absolutely, the product management team should actually be will be the head of the steering committee that will actually help us drive the strategy. There are some challenges with some of the other stakeholders or like teams actually owning the strategy, and there might be some nuances to it. I might just touch upon some of these. So let's talk about marketing and sales having owning it. Yes, I mean they are smart people there and they definitely know their stuff. But the challenge is like they are very, I would say, laser focused on making sure that they are always driving up revenue and making sure that they have the maximum conversion from their market qualified leads to actual, let's say, opportunities. So they'll always drive a lot of decisions around that. That means that you're kind of leaving this whole area of like what would actually drive the actual retention, because I don't think so marketing and sales might actually care a lot about that. Again, very bad to say they won't not care, but I think that's not their purview because they care more about increasing the top line. Again, uh, UX and design, definitely, I mean they in my opinion have one of the, like, I would say, the most constructive feedback to give around the strategy. But again, they would actually lose out on the final outcomes, but they would be increasingly thinking about how to make sure that the experience has been frictionless. So again, like same would go with engineering, where they would be focusing a lot about, let's say, the scalability aspect and the operational availability and all that stuff, but maybe they might be missing on some of the other things. So the unique position of product management, which we all know, like, how product management actually sits in the organization and what are the skills that they have and what is the expectations out of them, gives them the opportunity to give a holistic view and think from revenue to customer success to, let's say, satisfaction to usage. So that will give them the more holistic view, and they can kind of pull in or lean on other teams to think about the instrumentation strategies that are needed. So again, this gives us to the second aspect, which is called align. And why align is very important. So yeah, our previous poll, basically, I am talking about maybe the product management should definitely lead it, but it's no one man show for sure. I mean, what's important is you have to have equal representation from every stakeholders that you have, who might be interested in this data or who might be helping you implement this instrumentation. So you're talking about product engineering to be on the same boat. You want to make sure that the UX has bought into this idea. You've also make sure that the execs have bought into this idea, because again, it's huge investment, and make sure that they have all the data insights that they need, and we are able to articulate the long-term value that we can create. Again, these are on the people aspect of it, but there's some of the nuances also around the tactical aspects of it. So you also got to align on the project structure. So what's interesting is why I specifically talked about project structure here is a lot of us PMs are already working in companies who are owning products on multiple channels. You're talking about mobile to web to maybe, let's say, some of them might actually have, like, let's say, chatbots, and there is a inherent bias towards just creating one project structure, or let me one instrumentation structure for each of these products and kind of treat them separately. So what you're basically saying is that the experience of a user in one channel would be completely different from an experience of the other channel. But what you will actually see is your customers actually use all your products in different phases along the day to just achieve the same goal. So you might start with the mobile, then go to the office, start using web, and by the time you're home, maybe you're just chatting with something else. Again, so what's important is to provide a project structure that will actually give you the holistic view of all the channels that you have. So make sure that your project structure resembles that, whether it's one product or multiple structures. Again, pushing data into one single structure. I mean, that's all conversations to have with your team. Other important thing is naming convention. Remember, as a PM team or maybe a PM who is leading this whole initiative, you cannot scale yourself to make sure that every PM and every team is actually writing the correct convention or following the order rules and all that stuff. So you got to make sure that you're kind of delegating as much as possible and provide state have policies in place to make sure that the naming conventions are right and all that. I'll talk a bit about the naming conventions in a bit as part of best practice as well. But again, very important to align how are we going to name, what are the consistency we're going to follow. What's also important is naming conventions. Once it actually becomes very used in the company, you don't have to start referring to the data dictionary to find out what exactly data point I'm looking for. Because let's say if you already know this is how I'm going to name my event, you can already start searching for it and you'll find it. There's a very high possibility to find it. So again, you're making the effort to find data frictionless for our customers. Again, moving on, it's also very important to align on the super properties and events. I'll tell you a bit about like what super properties and events are. Taking a step back, uh, when you're trying to instrument a product, you basically do two important things. One is you kind of define what are some of the super level properties that we have. We're talking about which are going to get carried over for each of the every event that you're going to do. So example is what browsers what the person is actually using, what is the channel, what is the location, what is the device that he's using, what is the ARR for the customer, which stage of let's say sales cycle he is in, whether he's an opportunity, whether he is like let's say converted, or whether it's like let's say churning. So these information will just provide you like more information to each and every event. So now let's say if you're able to already define what are the super properties, then each event would just be an action. So a customer pressed this, but if you want to know how many customers actually press this event, and you want to know what's the distribution between, let's say, whether it's an opportunity versus whether it's churn, you're going to turn back to user properties. I'm going to answer more questions. We'll definitely have more questions around this. So I'm going to take it forward to the question answer section later on. The last thing that you have to really align on is the compliance and privacy restrictions. Again, every company, based on which sector they operate in, which industry they operate in, are going to have like different appetite for privacy and compliances. So you want to make sure that whatever plan that you have for the data collection is going to adhere to these, so that you can make sure you're not in trouble later on. Sorry. Yeah. The third step is instrument. So once we have aligned, once we already defined, let's talk about instrumentation. This is now the execution part of it. Now I would challenge each one of our participants here to think about instrumentation strategy is no different from a product, let's say development. So when you're trying to do a product development or a feature development, you're thinking in terms of MVPs. You're thinking in terms of how can I make sure that the first iteration has all the things that a specific customer use base would want, and then you kind of start building on top of it. Use the same thought process when you're also trying to come up with a execution plan to instrument your product. So start identify by all the critical customer user journeys that you want to instrument, whether it's like the sign up flow, whether it is the let's say I don't know, maybe adding a document to deleting let's say a case comment. Identify all those important ones that you care about, which will help you which will actually help you measure the outcome that you've already started with. Once you have this in place, start creating this event map. So in this journey that I've already identified, what are the instruments and signals that I have to put in place so that I'm able to capture all this information? like visualize it to be like a journey, and then think of all these points as the emitters to collect this information. Third thing is make sure that you're always consistent with whatever you're doing. So that means that you have not deviated from your naming conventions that you have thought about. You're consistent in terms of already talking to the other teams to make sure that they have all instrumented their part of the product, and you have instrumented your part of the product, so that the whole customer journey has been realized. And the last one is to make sure that you're already always optimizing for reducing the noise. When I say reducing the noise, always find opportunities wherever you feel that a specific event does not make sense that you have captured during alignment. You can kind of again debate with others and make sure that you're not capturing. Again, more data sometimes is more confusing than less data. So this is a framework that I created when I was leading one of the instrumentation initiatives. Think of this as a sheet where each PM basically goes and identifies his product area and starts identifying all the events that you're going to capture. As you can see here, this were the two areas that I was PM for: the payments and the 2FA, the two-factor authentication. That was one project I was working on, and here are all the events that I identified. Again, very high level, but this slide deck would be available for you later on, so you can kind of see how we have named it and how we are thinking about the properties for each event and where are we going to implement it. This template will also be available for you later on as part of the references. The last and the most important thing is refine. So when I said treat this initiative no different from your product or a feature, every feature goes through multiple iteration where you're constantly evolving the feature. Same thing with the instrumentation. Whenever you're trying to come up with new features, make sure that you've already come back to your universal data dictionary that you've already created and added those events as well, so that your engineering team can instrument them as well as you're starting to collect them. Second thing, you as the product or as your product matures, there'll always be features that you're going to sunset. There'll always be things that you're going to change a bit different from what you started. You pivot, you add new features, you delete the old ones. Make sure that you're cleaning up your event deck. Treat it no different than the tech deck, because again, emitting those which has no value is going to just add more confusion, because again, your reports are skewed, you don't need them. Have a very defined review mechanism in place. Maybe a new PM, when he's joining, he might definitely want to add events to his feature. Make sure that you're able to have a review process in place where some of the experienced one can actually just see what those events are before they actually have been productionized. Because once they're in the production, it's very hard to change them again. Because of the scale of these events, it is not very easy to go and change all the events that you've captured. You can only change the ones that are in the forward. That means that you're losing out on some of lot of let's say key information about usage. And last one, I would say, keep the taxonomy or the universal data dictionary that I talked about up to date. And taxonomy is no different from this sheet maybe. It's this, which is constantly being updated whenever new features are getting pushed and all that stuff. So that brings to the last part of our presentation, which is the best practices and the references. There are some best practices that I have pulled up from different sources that I refer during this course. Some of them, I don't want to go through each of them, but the key thing I would try to highlight is be absolutely sure when you're trying to introduce sensitive information like email addresses and GDPR compliances, because it all depends on the service contract that you have with your customer. So make sure that you kind of refer them to see what is the EULA contract that you have in place, and as part of that contract, what is allowed and what is not allowed. The other thing, again, as I told you, naming convention, very, very important. I know I might be sounding like a broken record, but it becomes like an hassle once you have to go and change if you have not followed an order. Last but not the least, there are some bunch of really good resources that I found very useful. So this slide deck would be shared with you by our friends at Product Camp. So feel free to use them. As part of that, I'm also adding 2 different templates that I found very useful when I'm trying to create this universal data dictionary or taxonomy. The last one is the one that I just showed, the personal taxonomy. So feel free to use it wherever you feel fit. So that almost concludes towards the end of our presentation. I hope like you might this presentation was useful and this whole exercise was worth of your time. And yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Your time really matters to me. So thanks a lot for staying in there. So I'm open to questions. Feel free to shoot in anything that you have.
Thank you, Pawan. We've received quite a few questions. I'll call them out one by one. We'll spend about 10 minutes on Q&A section. So first question we have is from Shrishti, and her question is, what's the correlation of engagement and retention?
Very good. So there's definitely, I mean, you have to look at the data to really say, again, there's a lot of theory and literature around it, but usually they say that higher engagement will actually lead to higher retention. So there is that correlation, but again, there's not causation. Please absolutely be clear about it. It all depends on the type of product. So an example I'll tell you is Facebook is highly dependent on the engagement metrics, so which will make sure that it is being able to retain the customer. But for some of the other products which are not used very often, the example I'll give you is your tax I don't know tax filing application. You use it once in a year. There you can't really measure the engagement, right? Like over the years. So it all depends on the type of product and the industry you are. But usually the general consensus is that there is a correlation between these two.
Great. Thank you, Pawan. The next question we have is, can you give some examples for leading and lagging indicators? And this is a question from Shyam.
Absolutely. Very great question. And there's a lot of literature around it. There's a book called as High Output Management by Andy Grove. He was the ex-CEO of Intel. Brilliant, brilliant book. And he talks a lot about this. The example I would give in my space is, let me think about the product that I used to work on. Perfect. So the lagging indicator is churn, right? Like when the customer is actually going to churn, like how many customers actually churn. The leading indicators to churn is, let's say, the usage metrics for a specific feature that is very important. So an example I'll give you is Salesforce's one product is Service Cloud, okay? And one of the key metrics for Service Cloud is how many cases you are able to create and all that stuff. If your customer has not made sure that he has already propagated his customer facing websites to include this link to create a case and all that stuff, that means that your usage of customer case is very less. There might be a possibility, again, that that might lead to churn, basically saying that, it's a shelfware, I'm not using it because I'm not getting those value. Again, there's a two-edged sword. It can also be that your product is so awesome that no one is actually providing you customer support cases. But again, like what is important to hear is you got to make sure that you have your pulse on the leading indicators and using that to make sure that you're able to draw a line to one of the lagging indicators like revenue churn or something like that. If it's not clear, I can go for some other example if it's if
No,
it
I
helps.
think that's a great example of Pawan, and was able to follow personally, because uh, that makes sense that you have to keep a tab on the indicators which are kind of giving you signals of whether there is a likelihood of a customer going to churn in near future. So I think uh, great explanation. Thanks for that. I'll move on to the next question, which is, how important is customer engagement in B2B products? And if you can give some examples, is also the request from the.
Absolutely. How important is customer engagement in B2B products, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so B2B products is no different, I would say. One thing that it's very interesting in B2B and B2C is B2B products, the person who is using and the person who is actually making the decision to buy are a bit different. So sometimes, like, a lot of the B2B customers actually go and B2B companies make sure that they always appease the buyer and not the user. Having said that, uh, it is very important considering that nowadays a lot of companies, the customers, I would say, demands have increased. The example I'll give you is Slack. So everyone has used Slack, I'm pretty sure, or maybe Zoom also, right? Like these two products are like pretty hot stocks right now. It's a B2B product at the end of the day, Slack. But their customer engagement, like they make sure that they are tracking each and everything from the number of threads that you are able to create to how many integrations that you have with Slack and all that stuff. And believe me, I've had like I was reading one of the blogs by one of the PMs from Slack. They are able to create a model on churn prediction, saying that depending on number of integrations that you have on Slack, that will make sure that they're able to they're able to influence you to add a bit more, so that the switching cost to move to some other product, like let's say Microsoft Teams or something else, becomes very hard. So again, very important to constantly monitor customer engagement. It is important in B2B as well. I would say more important nowadays than it was maybe, let's say, 5 or 6 years back, where the buyers were a bit different and the users were not as vocal.
Makes sense. Moving on to the next question. We have tried product instrumentation, but more often than not, it ends up being a point in time initiative. Are there any best practices for making it a core part of your product management process?
Absolutely, very great question. And this comes to the rigor of your process, right? So one of the things, a product instrumentation strategy will only be successful if it seeps into the culture of building a product. So a lot of companies, like let's say Intercom and others, already have this thesis called as how we build product and all that stuff. And as part of that process, they have a section called as measuring the success of a specific feature that they have shipped. That means that each PM or each Scrum team have to identify some of the success metrics that they want to monitor even this feature is getting developed. So when you're already forcing yourself to think about it, you're already thinking about, okay, so if I need to measure, if that is the thing that we need to measure, what are some of the indicators I need to have when I'm trying to build this feature? And you start creating a map backwards. So I would suggest that if you want to make sure that this thing does not become like a one-off exercise and you're constantly doing it, make sure that you're finding some kind of processes or tweaking some of the processes to make sure that you are making this as one of the criterion before the feature actually goes live or something like that.
Got it. So I will ask last two questions now. One is, what are your thoughts on the tools in the market that help in automated product instrumentation?
Oh, wow, that's a very good question. Um so I would say each product and each company has different needs for product instrumentation. Let's say if you are a product, like let's say if you're a blog company, like a product owner for a blog product medium or something like that. In that scenario, the needs for product instrumentation are a bit more basic, and maybe you might get a bit more out of the box uh, that you want to do. But let's say if you're trying to create a product that might be used for AI or AR or something like that, like AR or VR or something like that. Those tool sets are not that easily available. That means that you might have to go a bit deeper and start instrumenting yourself, like what those customer touch points are and all that stuff. Again, there are also some of the nuances in terms of sometimes these out of the box. Okay, these out of the box products, when I've used in the past, one thing I found it is that the real ease of setting them up. That means that you don't really need to talk to engineers sometimes to actually add like a new flow and others, but they're limited, and also sometimes they make your product very slow because they might be shipping bunch of these events that you're not even aware of. So over time, you start realizing that, and you kind of move away from these automated tools. So it all depends on like the maturity, the industry, and all that stuff. Uh, But I would say like there's I can't pick a contender saying that this is better than the other one. And I think the other question was also like some of the good tools, right, Tanuj?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have not specifically used a lot of out of the box product instrumentation tools, but I know Mixpanel actually gives it out of the box. You can activate it. There is, I think there are a few other products out there that actually do it. Uh, Personally, in my usage, I found Segment and Mixpanel to be very powerful. They have everything that a SaaS company would need. If you're looking for something that's more deeper than Mixpanel, like you're looking for like custom querying and like all that stuff, I would suggest looking for Looker, which is like a pretty in-depth, like a pretty neat product, which gives you like both the data transforming capabilities as well as data visualization capabilities, and again has the same scale as some of the other event-based products.
Okay. The next question then is for an on-premises B2B or enterprise product, what are the factors that you would recommend tracking?
Can you come again? Sorry.
For an on-premises B2B or enterprise product, what are the factors that you would recommend tracking?
That's interesting. So one thing that you might want to realize is when you're doing an on-prem product, how are you going to ship that metrics to a place where you could access? That is the biggest black box that you would have if you are a PM for on-prem product, right? Like I mean, like let's say on-prem, they have their own private cloud maybe, and maybe the max that you could do is basically push all that into a local log store, or maybe hope that maybe you are able to deploy like a small instance of your database there. So I think I don't know how a lot of companies actually do in on-prem. My expertise does not like go there. But one thing I would explore is trying to work out a way where you're able to push that into some kind of a common base that maybe you're able to access to. So one thing is that I mean that's one of the biggest limitations that you'd have as an on-prem PM. What is the other question? Sorry, Tanuj.
Yeah, so I mean, I got a comment from so the question was from Uday, and I've got one more comment from Uday saying that they've got a bucket in AWS S3 that captures the logs.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
it's like, a continuation of the same question. And if I could add, I mean, I kind of agree with what Pawan is saying that if it is an on-premises product, then more often than not, it indicates that the client is a little sensitive about data, usage. So I think regulations might also come into picture, at least to the extent of your contractual agreement with your, client, that whether you're allowed to capture this kind of a data. But I'll leave it to you, Pawan, to add more to that. Yeah.
No, I think you hit the nail there. Absolutely. I mean, it is definitely not very easily scalable. I mean, if Uday says that he already has a mechanism in place to push it into S3, that means that he has to find a way to push from S3 to some other location.
Yeah.
Again, very important to make sure that whatever data that you're capturing is adhering to the customer's compliance. Because at the end of the day, you're basically telling that I'm going to take this data from your secured location and I'm going to put it into some other location where I'm going to do the analysis. So make sure that you have that cleared out with your customer. I hope he will be fine or she will be fine for it. But just make sure about that. Uh, there was some other question around that, right?
So there is okay. What are the top factors to track? So that again is continuation from Uday on the same question.
Yeah, I mean that is very subject to the product, right? I mean, what is the feature? What is some of the things that you're trying to? I mean, maybe because of the black box, you might want to track, let's say, the usage of the product. Like, are they hitting the business metrics that they would like to hit, or something like that? Again, very broad question, but I would say very dependent on the product and the goals that you're trying to achieve with that product.
Yeah. Great. There are a few more questions, but I think in the interest of time, we are having to wrap up here. I've tried to at least include one question from everybody who has raised questions over the chat panel. If I have missed out, my apologies. I would encourage you to, connect personally with Pawan. I hope, Pawan, that's okay. Uh, people can reach out, because the whole aim of product camp is to nurture the product community within Hyderabad. And if this becomes a reason for you to connect and engage, we really feel that the purpose was met. With this, we almost come to the end of the webinar. But before we close, we wanted your input, one on how we did today. So we'll bring up a poll on your screen. If you can give us a little bit of feedback, that would really help us to schedule the next session. Great. We'll wait for another 5 seconds, and then there's one last point we need your input on, and we'll bring that question. Great. So I am gonna close this poll, and I am gonna bring the final question, rather, a feedback that we need from you for the day, which is, what would you like us to cover in the next session? Uh, you know, uh, we really want to cover the topics that you are looking for information on. So if you can please provide your inputs, that would be very helpful. And we do conduct such polls through our social channels as well. Would encourage you to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is Product Camp Hyderabad, and also on our LinkedIn page, where we regularly conduct such polls. I still see some people are casting their votes, so we're going to wait for another 10 seconds before we close this. Great. Thank you all. I don't see any movement now, so I'm gonna close it now. Great. Thank you. So this really brings us to the end of the session today. Thank you again, Pawan, for taking the time and effort to share your knowledge with all of us. Thank you to all our attendees for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the session. With that, we bring the webinar to close. Talk to you guys later.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.